So this video is about body painting tools and the effects that you can achieve with different kind of tools or application methods. But the first thing I want to talk to you about is the preparation of your paints. So if you've ever done proper watercolour painting, you'll know that you have to kind of prepare the paint, so you have to wet them slightly. This is a brand new paint, but it would be the same thing if I was working on an already used paint. As long as that paint's dry, you need to saturate it and you need to let that water kind of soak in so that it softens the top layer of paint and it softens the pigment. Spend a little bit of time just mixing that paint around so that you really distribute the pigment nicely and you get a very kind of smooth, even consistency in the paint mix. So you can see it's not dripping off of my brush, but it's not so dry that it's going to be kind of scratchy on the skin. So the first brush I'm working with is a round paintbrush, and you can get these in lots of different sizes, and usually you can get a pack of varied sizes. They're round, they're soft bristles, they're really cheap. You can get them in the range in Hobbycraft, but these are the ones that you want to invest in if you want to kind of do hand painted detail or fine line work. So I've got like a medium size, I think this is a 2. But I've got kind of a medium-ish size, but you can see the soft bristles kind of swirl and swish and allow you to make kind of like fluid brush strokes. You can outline really nicely in these. They're not too stiff. They've got a little bit of flex to them. You can get synthetic, you can get real hair, $2.99, and you can get a pack of like 4. You quite often get the ones with like the silicone grip, but these are really good for detail. This next brush is again a round brush, but it is a much shorter, stubbier version, very, very thin. So this is lovely for fine line detail, but it's a little bit more rigid. You're not going to get that fluid kind of movement with the brush. You have to be quite short and precise with your brush strokes. This is nice if you're going to do really fine outlines or kind of small marks onto the skin. You're not going to be able to paint quickly with this one. Next brush is a flat brush. I've talked about how you use square brushes in one of the other videos, but the point of this is a flat brush is really good for kind of a smooth application, but it's not fast at all, and you can often end up with streaks. So this is good if I were doing small kind of mid areas, not necessarily like base coat, but just small sections of colour where I want quite a neat edge. There's a lot more that you can do with a square topped brush, but that will be with things like split cakes. So yeah, as far as body paint goes, these are useful for kind of mid-sized or small areas. This brush is like a regular foundation brush. So this is a very dense flat top brush. Now any type of domed or kabuki or foundation brush is the one that you're going to want to use when applying paint to the body quickly and very smoothly. Look how that goes on. It's like butter and toast. It's lush. So you get a really thick, opaque, very smooth finish very quickly. When the bristles start to dry out, you can dab them into the paint, and you can also use them to get like a mottled kind of texture effect. And this is again another dense sort of packing brush, which is lovely for quickly painting base layers all over the body, but it also can be used to texturize. So if you need to fill areas up really quickly and give a bit of detail, this is the way to do it. Right, you're probably thinking, Kate, what are you doing with a tint brush? But they're just dead handy for flicking or texturizing in body paint. You know how to flick using a toothbrush or whatnot, but these are just helpful for that. But you can also dry brush with them, and I've done that way too wet. But when you dry it off and you sort of draw that over a base layer, it can look like wood or stone or just a nice texture. Alright, here she is with her sponge. Now, you cannot paint an entire body with a sponge. You will be there for 4 centuries, okay? But what you can do is small areas that build up a very quick, nice, smooth, quite dry finish. So if you need to paint over it immediately, that's a nice way of doing it. It also enables you to blend like a dream. So you can blend colours together, providing they're all wet. You know, you can't blend successfully wet onto dry, but you can blend wet and wet together, and the sponge will absorb any excess moisture, and it will let you kind of buff and blend and melt the products together. You've seen me do this before in special effects, but I love a bit of this in body paint. If you want to just kind of rough up one side of your sponge to give you like a stamp, you can do nice filler and nice texture with this. I'm going for like a, well, you'll see later, but if you want to kind of do smoke or the foam at the bottom of like a waterfall, or see like the waves crashing, amazing. Okay, I really rate this as like a very avant-garde, unusual technique, but just using things like card or different types of paper. If you're kind of doing like a really textured fabric pattern or tribal pattern, and you want kind of rough, dry but uniformed marks, you can do things with cardboard and it looks cool. And you can use dry tissue or scrunched up paper, dab that into paint and whack that over the top of a base colour, and all of a sudden you start to build up texture. If you want to do wood or a seascape, or if you want to do a sky or clouds or smoke, anything like that, this is a nice little technique that you can use. Alright, I'm back with my sponges. This time I'm going to really pay attention to how I mix my paints and how I saturate my sponge. I do not want to squeeze that sponge and have any moisture coming out of it. It should be a dry, dry-ish sponge, lightly misted or lightly tapped into water, and then really nicely well mixed paints on that sponge is going to give you the most beautiful blend. So I've got my two colours on there, and then as I stamp and I pat, you can see there's no water dripping or running, but look at that beautiful blend, it's like a dream. So you can imagine if you have to do like a sunset, or if you are doing like shadows and highlights in a fabric, or you're trying to paint just a nice kind of gradient on the skin, this is a lovely way to do it. You can of course blend with a brush, but this enables you to get a nice smooth kind of airbrushed blend, if you will. So I've got my sponge, I've tapped that across with two colours to give me a background. So I'm going to go back with that little sponge that I had earlier, where I made holes in it. Everything's covered in hair because my body paint stuff was in a bag with my wig making stuff, so don't at me, okay? It's not my hair, it's a yak hair. Anyway, sponge I have taken, and I'm going for like unicorn fantasy, cute mystical sky, and I'm using that sponge to just give me some kind of cloud situation. I don't know what I'm doing, but imagine this if you did it on the body and you had a little bit of airbrush going on in there as well. You could do something really, really pretty. But it's just showing you ways in which you can layer up tools and techniques to get different effects, very much like when we airbrush. So I've sponged the background. I've now sponged and kind of done a cloud-ish effect. I'm going to do a bit of dry brushing, and that's going to give me a little bit of extra... Oh, another hair. Oh no, I'm not. I'm flicking. Look at that. Flicking some stars in the sky, and then I think I go and dry brush a little bit of swishy sky cloud detail. I don't know. So anyway, what you kind of need to do is figure out what brushes are your go-to brushes and have them set aside in a plan of like what you're going to use for what. So your big brushes for your base layers, and your mid layer brushes, and then your fine detail brushes. Glitter should be applied by sprinkling, not blowing. This is a pandemic. no one wants to be blown on anymore. So dust it on with a little brush or sprinkle it on. And if you do that when the paint is still kind of damp, it will stick on its own. It just gives you a nice little extra dimension. And then finally a little bit of hand painted detail with a brush that was a little bit too big for what I was trying to achieve. But you get my drift, you know what I'm on about. So what you're going to do is kind of recreate something similar to what I've done, using a different range of brushes or tools and techniques to make a kind of varied little kind of painting with different kind of methods in it. So I hope that's helpful. And one last thing to say, whenever you're working with body paint brushes, don't ever leave them stood up in the water. It just wrecks the brushes and ruins them. So when you're not using the brush, swill it off in the water, tap the end off on some tissue or a towel and lay it flat. A, it stops your water going really gross and muddy, and B, it will save your brushes. That's it. Thank you.